Okay, so I really messed up. My first time on holiday from the US to jolly old England, and now I'm being convicted on federal drug trafficking charges just because I left my bags with that seemingly nice man while I was in the airport bathroom. Thankfully, I'm not in Singapore, so I won't be hanged for my stupid mistake, but I'm gonna be doing hard time in a US federal prison until my next appeal. But don't worry, I've seen The Shawshank Redemption twice, and I'm pretty sure I watched a couple episodes of Prison Break. It's not like there are 10 super important rules, right? This should be a piece of cake. Number 10. In prison, do not refer to the other guys doing time with you as inmates. Of course, on my first day, I wanted to make sure I make a good first impression. After all, I'm potentially staring down the barrel of a 10-year sentence, so it's definitely a good idea to make some friends. And that's why on my first day in the yard, I walked up to the nearest group of prisoners and decided to lay my British charm on them. "Hello, my fellow inmates," I said. They all looked at me like I was an alien. I figured it must have been the accent, so I tried again. "How about we go from inmates to good mates," I said. And sadly, nobody laughed. They just kept staring at me. That night, I was helping scrub down the tiles in the showers, and someone whacked me on the back of the head with a bar of soap inside a tube sock. Ouch! Next thing I knew, I was in the infirmary. And when I told the prison doctor the whole story, he just shook his head and said, "Word of advice, buddy. Don't call your fellow prisoners inmates. It's a sign of disrespect or shows that you're softer than Wonder Bread. Use convicts next time." Well, that's one lesson learned the hard way. Number 9. Don't PC up. After only one day in prison, I'd already decided that being locked up with a bunch of murderers and hardcore career criminals, it really wasn't for me. These men could be real brutes, and I've always been more of a soft touch. I thought that it was probably best to go get myself a little protection from all the scary men with cheeks covered in teardrop tattoos, and that's why I approached one of the guards and asked him if I could be put under protective custody. He asked why, and I told him my tale of soapy woe. But the guard just laughed and rudely told me that my concerns just weren't a priority right now. Worse still, one of my fellow inmates, convicts, saw me get rejected. How humiliating. It literally added injury to insult when that convict, along with a few others, cornered me in the yard the next day and kicked me several times in the head. I just can't win. Later in the infirmary, the doctor told me, "You're lucky it was just a beating. You really shouldn't PC up unless it's a life or death, because if you get seen doing it, you'll make it life or death." Number 8. Do not gamble, borrow, or use drugs that you get up front with the promise that you'll pay later without knowing beyond a doubt that you'll be able to pay. After my frankly quite shoddy first few days as a convict, I must say I was really feeling sorry for myself. Not only was I gonna miss out on the release of the PlayStation 5 because of the length of the sentence, they didn't even have so much as a PS3 on the inside. It was torture. And that's why I decided to score myself a bit of the old Bolivian marching powder from my cellmate, Hector. He gave me a quizzical look when I asked, and I said, "Are you sure you're good for it?" Yeah, of course, whatever," I said. "Just give me my drugs. I'm miserable here." So Hector obliged me, and I spent the next few hours feeling pretty darn good. Until, of course, Hector pushed me up against the wall and held a shiv up to my throat, asking for his money with language I can't really repeat here, and I told him I couldn't pay him back. He thankfully only beat the living hell out of me. "Don't gamble, borrow, or take any drugs you can't pay for, you stupid British jerk," he said, before going to bed. I spent the night in the infirmary. Again. Number 7. Never back down from a challenge. By midweek, I'm not gonna lie, I looked like a mess. I was so bruised up that I looked like a Dalmatian. But I was feeling lonely since Hector was sent to solitary for beating me up. I decided to just sit quietly in the yard and read the only book in the prison library that had been available at the time, which sadly was a copy of Justin Bieber's biography. So you can only imagine my frustration when a man they called Aryan Nation Steve, on an account of the swastika tattoos and racial hatred, came over to me, jonesing for a fight. He said in his deep, intimidating voice, "You and me right now, little man. Let's go." Of course, he was twice my size and way angrier, so I didn't much fancy a fight. "Can we just talk about this like civilized men?" I asked. When a few other convicts heard me say this, they apparently took offense and started crowding around us. Aryan Nation Steve challenged me again. "I'm sorry, Steven, I'm just not feeling it," I said. So I got beat up by 7 guys instead of 1. And while Aryan Nation Steve was punching me in the face, he said, "Word of advice, when someone challenges you, you take that challenge, or things get a whole lot worse." Duly noted. Number 6. Defer to and show respect to the older convicts. You do not get to survive prison to old age by accident. Needless to say, after all these beatings, I was feeling pretty powerless. I needed a sense of retribution or my self-esteem was going to take a real nosedive. I vaguely remembered something about asserting dominance by taking on the strongest guy in the yard. But the strongest guy in the yard, a Russian gangster who went by Big Boy Boris, would probably use me as a toilet brush. That's why I decided to instead take on Toothless Bill, who at 75 was probably the oldest guy in the penitentiary. As a sprightly young lad at 22, I figured I could probably take the old codger. After all, as I'd learned yesterday, you can never turn down a fight in prison. This would be a perfect way to at least end up above someone on the food chain. So I approached him and said, "Come on, Toothless Bill, it's time to throw down." And without a word, he rose from his seat, gave me a swift chop to the throat that sent me crumbling to the ground, gasping for air. He gave a grizzled old chuckle and said, "Respect your elders, kid. You don't get to survive prison to old age by accident." Number 5. Maintain good personal hygiene. It goes without saying that prison really wasn't going well for me. I'd learned 5 important rules, sure, but at what cost? I was getting bloodied and bashed on almost a daily basis, and ever since that soap bar assault on the first day, I was petrified of getting back into the showers. As a result, my smell apparently became a little offensive to my fellow convicts. And okay, maybe I'd been spotted leaving the bathroom without washing my hands a few times, but I'd only peed. And with the constant threat of assault coming at me from every angle, maybe some of the little things were beginning to slip my mind. But apparently all this wasn't so little to the other prisoners, as they weren't nearly accustomed to my brand of natural musk as I was. I think that's why I was hit over the back of the head with a rock and dragged into the showers, where they forcibly scrubbed me down against my will and then shoved a bar of soap into my mouth. It was my first day all over again. They didn't say much, save for a lot of very creative swear words, but I still got the message loud and clear. Maintain good personal hygiene or have the snot kicked out of you. Understood. Number 5. Don't break the chow hall seating arrangement. If the constant violence and degradation were bad enough, the food in prison is terrible too. Just a random assortment of government-mandated slop on a TV dinner plate. After being handed my so-called meal in the chow hall, I turned to take my seat and suddenly noticed that, by what seemed like pure chance, the convicts in the chow hall were all segregated by race. How strange, I thought. Maybe they'd been in prison so long that they didn't even know segregation had ended. I decided I'd do the decent thing and go sit in the African American section to tell them about all the amazing racial progress that had gone on outside. They'd probably be delighted to hear it. But as I sat down among them, they all just gave me some really strange looks. I decided I was probably because of all the bruises, so I persisted with my pitch-perfect retelling of the American Civil Rights Movement. I somehow ended up with a dining fork sticking out of my cheek by the end of the anecdote. But in the process, I learned an extremely valuable lesson. Don't break the chow hall seating code. Oh, and don't be condescending to other people either. Number 3. Mind your own business at all times and use 100% of your common sense at all times. Hector was back in the cell with me that night, but our relationship had definitely been a little strained since the drug-fueled violence incident, so we mainly kept to ourselves. But in the night, I heard strange noises coming from the top bunk. When I took a peek, I saw that Hector had somehow obtained some contraband lipstick, drawn a crude image of a woman on his pillow, and was passionately making out with it. Of course, I found this to be hilarious and decided to tell the story to a few fellow convicts out in the yard. They were laughing along at all the right moments. Things were finally going well. I was being liked, until suddenly I was being garroted with a shoelace. Turns out Hector had heard me talking smack and wanted a little retribution of his own. Thankfully, the guards intervened before he could finish the job. It was another important lesson for the future. Mind your own business at all times and use 100% of your common sense at all times. Number 2. Do not fraternize with convicts of another race other than your own. If you do, understand that you're putting your life or your health at risk. I was still feeling silly from my ham-handed attempts to bridge the racial divide in the chow hall and decided to try it again on a much smaller scale in the yard. I approached an African-American prisoner and struck up a conversation. You know, all the standard prison small talk, his name, what he was in for, and whether he had a favorite video from the infographic show. He seemed like a nice enough guy, if a little skittish about talking to me. Maybe I was finally building up my cred. Though I realized the true reason for his nervousness afterwards. When Aryan Nation Steve punched me really hard in the face and called me a race traitor, that's when I learned it was probably just best to avoid fraternizing with convicts who weren't the same race as me. God, who would have guessed that prison was such a prejudiced environment? Number 1. Don't tell on anybody for any reason. My American prison experience on the whole had been horrible. If you could give prisons Yelp reviews, I'd definitely give this one 0 stars. I made no friends, been assaulted constantly, and had just a generally bad time. I decided I'd finally get payback the only way I knew how. I tattled to a guard about all the sketchy things my fellow convicts had been doing and watched the warden rake them over the coals for it. I told them about Hector's drug running, about Aryan Nation Steve's penchant for punching, and about the countless instances of rule breaking and contraband I'd seen on the yard. It seemed like a great idea, until that night when I was peeling potatoes in the kitchen. Suddenly I found myself surrounded by stone-faced convicts, all of them carrying shivs. "I'm guessing you're not here to help me with the potatoes," I asked. And one of them just sneered and said to me, "You forgot the most important rule of prison, kid. Snitches get stitches." And in that moment, before receiving a very painful cell block B acupuncture session, I realized that there were not only 10 crucial prison commandments that you have to follow to save your skin, but that there was an unspoken 11th commandment. A commandment that is arguably the most important of all. Make sure you learn the other 10 beforehand, because if you have to learn them by experience on the inside, then you won't make it out alive. Check out Man So Violent Even Other Prisoners Feared Him and Shocking U.S. Human Prisoner Experiments Revealed for more crazy facts about what goes on behind bars.